Welcome. Today is for our Lunch and Learn Executive Functioning Practical Strategies for Everyday Life. My name is Amber Ham, and I'm the Training and Outreach Coordinator with Kentucky Spin. And I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items before we jump into our webinar. So Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network, or KY Spin, is a statewide 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to link families and individuals with disabilities to valuable resources that will enable them to live productive, fulfilling lives. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Education under IDEA since 1988, when Kentucky first received a PTI. Kentucky Spin Parent Center provides training, information, and support for children and youth with all types of disabilities, birth through 26 years and beyond. Their parents, families, as well as professionals. It's so much easier to tell you what Kentucky Spin does not do in comparison to what we do, because we do so much. We are not attorneys. We do not give legal advice, and we do not represent families. With that being said, we empower families to effectively advocate for themselves and their children, maybe a loved one, anyone in their life. By providing that peer-to-peer support, we help families access the needed information and resources. And at this time, I am going to hand things over to our guest speaker today, Lindsay Eubanks. Lindsay, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Do you want me to share my screen first?
Sure.
Let me do that. Let's see here. All right. Does everybody see that? Do you see the screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm Lindsay Eubanks, and I am one of the Family and Community Field Training Coordinators for the Kentucky Autism Training Center. We try to be the leading resource on autism in Kentucky. We do that through evidence-based autism-related training, up-to-date local resources, and we collaborate with a lot of stakeholders like parents, educators. We do a lot of first responder training. I even got to do a training for mall Santa Clauses a couple months ago, and that was a lot of fun. So my focus is primarily on building capacities of caregivers and community partners throughout Kentucky. We do have a school initiative too, and we have other folks that work on that. But my role is with the caregivers and community partners. By trade, I am an occupational therapist. I've been OT with kids for 22 years. So that has given me quite a bit of experience with autism, ADHD, executive functioning development. I am a Kentucky native, although I am from Louisville, so you might not claim me. Sometimes they don't. And I have two of my own very neurospicy teenagers, a neurospicy husband and maybe a neurospicy dog. I'm not sure. But I'm so thankful that you are here to spend your lunch hour with me. And I am so thrilled to share professional and personal experience with executive functioning. So that is me. And I want to know a little bit why you are here. And I know I'm going to date myself by saying this, but when I thought of this question, I thought of Sophia on the Golden Girls, giving examples about, why am I here? And I pictured her saying, picture it, Sicily, 1922. So we're going to use that framework for examples. So picture it. It's time to leave for preschool. You ask your 4-year-old to put on their shoes. 30 minutes later, you find them in the living room wearing one shoe, no socks, and they've somehow started a puppet show with their stuffed animals. So that's the world of executive dysfunction with some young children. Or teenagers, time management. Need I say more there? It's Saturday night. Your teenager has a major exam on Monday. They've been studying all weekend, or so you think, until you notice they've actually been scrolling on their phone and playing video games. It's Sunday night, 10 o'clock. Panic sets in. They're cramming entire semester's worth of material in one night, and everybody's stressed out. And, for adults, let's be honest, these things don't go away necessarily just because we grow up. How many of us have sat down to work, got sidetracked by emails, quick check of social media, and then they decided to reorganize the spice rack all in that time. I know I've done something like that. So next thing you know, 2 hours later, you haven't really gotten anywhere. So those are some like funny examples of why you're here. If you have a second, I'd love for you to just type yes in the chat if you've ever experienced any version of this in either you or your own family. Oh, good. Absolutely. Yes. That makes me feel so much better. Oh, good. We're in good company. Yes, 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 yes. That's, oops, I got stuck. So, probably for you, but this is not another training for me. It's very personal. One of the reasons I do this is, and I'm here, is because I do miss my kids. And I know that's a weird thing to say. Here's what I mean. I find that the endless reminders, the nagging, the frustration over half-done chores all adds up. And I didn't realize this, but I was unintentionally creating a pressure cooker at home. I started noticing every time I came into the living room, my kids would leave. And I thought, was I clean? Did I smell bad? And then I asked them about it. And they said, the first thing you do when you come in here, Mom, is you tell us all the things we didn't do, remind us of all the things we need to do. So to them, Mom was becoming equated with criticism and disappointment. So ouch, right? And one thing I've learned that I will take to my grave so far in life is that we all need connection, especially with those in our own home. And I find when executive function challenges get in the way of my connection with my family, I really want to find ways to work around them. I want to build on strengths and I want to make things smoother at home. So whether you're a parent or a clinician or a teacher, the whole goal is to make things smoother for people and work around some of these weaknesses and build on the strengths that they have. So that's why we're here today. And yeah. So we're going to look at basic, just what is executive functioning? What are the core skills? We're going to look at a very brief brain thing. We're not going to go too deep into the brain because that's not the purpose of this training. We're going to look at some key milestones. And sometimes I will say EF instead of executive functioning because it's just a mouthful to say over and over again. So if you hear me say EF, that's what that means. We're going to look at just some factors like biological and environmental that impact executive functioning. We're going to look at identifying some strengths and weaknesses and how we can do that with both ourselves and others. And then, of course, the meat and potatoes, we want to look at some practical strategies to strengthen and the development of or accommodate for weak executive functioning skills. So what is executive functioning? It's a set of cognitive or mental and thinking skills that helps with managing behavior, organizing tasks, and regulating emotions. So these skills just allow us to focus, make decisions, follow through on goals. Another way to think of it is like an air traffic control system of the brain. So just like an air traffic control guide, it guides planes to take off, land, navigate safely through the air. Executive functioning helps us manage our thoughts, our actions, our emotions, and it helps you prioritize tasks, transition between activities, and just stay focused. In addition to those functions, executive function can also be thought of as a filing cabinet in your brain. I've heard it described this way. And its job is to organize memories into neat folders, and that makes it easy to retrieve information when you need it. That is a filing system that is working well. But what if the executive functions that are humming around in the background aren't reliable? What does it look like if the filing system isn't working? So it might look a little something like that. The papers or the thoughts can get scattered everywhere. It can be hard to remember things. You're losing items all the time. And all of this just leads to poor task completion. Why? Because it can take so long to find what you need. It takes a long time to find it. You have to retrieve it, then you have to use it. A personal example, I worked with a child once with ADHD and autism. And I noticed anytime she was asked like a recall type question, like favorite food, favorite song, what did you do today? Something where she had to, go back in her memory and find it. It took so long for her to recall the information, not because it's not there. It's in there somewhere. She just couldn't find it in that mess that was going around in her brain. And by the time she would recall the information, if she was with other children, they'd moved on by then. They became disinterested. they couldn't wait around long enough for her to find what she was trying to say. And so that does sometimes impact social development when you think about executive functioning in that way. Now, I did a little research, and there's no real consensus on an exhaustive list of executive functioning skills. But most scholars do agree that executive functioning does depend on 3 primary types of brain function. And most of those are the core skills of working memory, inhibitory, or what we'll call self-control, and then mental or cognitive flexibility. Any other specific skills generally stem from these 3 areas. Again, I said I did some research, and depending on the research and framework that you find, there can be 3, 5, 11, just different researchers have different frameworks. But every framework has at least these 7. So I listed 7 of the foundational skills that were in every framework that I could find out there. And since it's only a 1-hour training, we're just going to hit these 7. So the first ones are the main ones: working memory, self-control, cognitive flexibility. We're also going to look at planning, task initiation, organization, and everyone's favorite, time management. But before we do that, I want to have you watch this quick video because it explains this much better probably than I could with pictures.
Do you find your child to be disorganized? Do they have trouble focusing on more than one thing at a time? And what's up with them not remembering any of the instructions you just gave them? Expecting that your young child will be as organized as you or have as much focus as you is not quite developmentally accurate. When your child reaches preschool age, they are just starting to exhibit the skills of executive function, and it is your job to help nourish that growth. What is executive function? Executive function is a set of mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks successfully, and link past experiences to the present. To better understand this concept of executive function, let's take a look at what is going on within the brain. It all starts in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the most advanced part of the brain. In humans, it makes up almost the whole front third of the brain. It helps monitor and regulate your emotional circuits and habit circuits. For example, if a person is mad and their immediate reaction is to scream and throw punches, the prefrontal cortex allows them to come up with a more productive reaction, like explaining their feelings or taking some deep breaths to calm down. This part of your brain is also in charge of planning and getting stuff done. This can range from devising a little white lie or plotting revenge to going to the bathroom or planning a trip around the world. Importantly, it is also the slowest part of the brain to develop, continuing to mature until your mid-20s. So it's highly influenced by experiences, especially during the preschool years. A child is not born with executive function skills, but they are born with the potential to develop them. The skills of executive function depend on 3 different types of brain functions that are primarily mediated by the prefrontal cortex: working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control. Let's break each of these 3 skills down. Working memory is the ability to retain and use distinct pieces of information over short periods of time. Mental flexibility is the ability to sustain or shift attention in response to different demands or to apply different rules to different settings. Self-control enables us to set priorities and resist impulsive actions or responses. As you can see, the 3 executive function skills, working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control, affect almost every aspect of our day. Realizing that children are still learning and not just being bad can be a refreshing perspective for us adults to remember. So next time you realize that your child needs help following directions, staying focused, or seeing something from a different perspective, think of it as an opportunity to support and nurture brain development. When a child feels nurtured, their brain releases the hormone oxytocin, which reduces stress and allows the prefrontal cortex to flourish. Kids learn better by watching and imitating than they do by being taught. If you put pressure on your child to use these functions in a way that ignores their level of development, then you're likely increasing their stress and thus working against your own interests. Your love and the example you set are foundational to your child's mental development. This video was brought to you by the folks at Parent Lab.
All right. So I thought that was a nice little video to kind of explain things a little bit better. The next couple of skills we're going to look at, we're not going to rehash what they just talked about with working memory, self-control, or flexibility. So the next one is planning. That's the skill we're going to look at. And that just is the ability to think ahead, set goals, create steps to complete a task, and it helps us organize what needs to be done and decide the best way to do it. I keep getting stuck. There we go. Some examples of this include just a toddler who's organizing their blocks to build a tower. They're choosing which blocks to put on top. Or a preschooler that plans an art project. They got to go get all the materials, the crayons, the paper, the scissors. Or if you're preparing for a school or work project, you have to create a timeline to get the research, write the report, assemble the presentation, all before a due date. So those are just some examples of what planning can look like in the real world. As far as task initiation, the next skill, that's just the ability to start a task without unnecessary delay. It is overcoming procrastination, getting motivated, beginning a task, even if it's challenging or uninteresting. This is a struggle for myself. Some examples include, picking up toys after you've been asked to clean up once, not 500 times. A child who starts their homework right after school without needing to be reminded multiple times. Putting on your shoes before it's time to go, as soon as you've been told it's time to go, without a lot of resistance or hesitation. Organization is just the ability to create or maintain order by arranging materials, information, and tasks in a structured and efficient way. Examples are using a toy bin system, having cars in one bin, blocks in another, and returning them to the correct bin afterward. Maintaining digital files. This one's tricky for me as well. Organizing work documents into specific folders, cleaning them out regularly, organizing study materials, so having separate folders or binders, using labels, things like that. And time management, that's the ability to plan and control how you spend your time to accomplish tasks efficiently. So it involves setting priorities, estimating time, allocating time to meet deadlines and goals. Some examples of this, again, completing homework on time without rushing at the last minute. Being able to follow a daily routine, waking up, getting ready for school, finishing chores, and without the constant reminders. The constant reminder seems to be a key factor in executive functioning skills. And balancing school and social life as you get older, being able to balance schoolwork, playtime, music lessons, jobs, hobbies, things like that. I was going to do a poll, so I can't do it on here exactly, but in the chat, of these skills, which one do you think is going to be the one that is hardest or that your family needs to work on the most? I'm going to bring them back up real quick. Where'd it go? There you go. So if you can see those, what are the executive functioning skills that you think your family or you or your clients might need to address the most? Procrastination. I understand that one. Time management, task initiation. Yes. Yep. Yeah, I see a lot of task initiation with my own family. I tell my kiddos to go do something, and first they have to pet the dog, and then they have to, play with something on the table, and then they'll finally go do it. So yes, I totally understand. And of course, they all go together. It's not like we just have one skill that we have to work on. But so let me go to, where was I? In just a second. All right. I am not going to review this slide because we did look at the brain in the video, but I wanted to make sure you just had a picture of it for your resources in case you ever needed to refer back to it. So this is just a picture of the frontal lobe, so the prefrontal cortex. That's the hub of all things executive functioning for the most part. And then the amygdala, that's more of the emotion center. That's on the side of the brain. And it's more the threat detection system. Those are the two primary ones I just wanted us to focus on in this training. And of course, what you saw in the video. We are going to look a little bit more deeply at development. It's very important to know what to expect so we don't expect too much or we don't expect too little. This is a chart that I'm not going to review in full, just wanted you to have it for your references, but I am going to kind of go through different age groups. So as far as infants and toddlers, the skills that they are working on, development of attention, impulse control, and of course they are working with other things, but those are some primary ones. And some things you could expect is they're beginning to follow simple routines. They're beginning to pay attention for short periods of time, like playing with one toy. And they're beginning to practice impulse control in simple situations, like maybe waiting for a turn. And that's more towards the 3-year-old, not the 1-year-old age group. Preschoolers, that 3 to 5-year range, they're really working on working memory and just simple planning. So expectations could be following 2 to 3 step directions. Put on your shoes, grab your coat, come to the door. They're beginning to organize toys and tasks. They might be sorting objects by color or shape. And again, working on that basic impulse control, waiting in line, taking turns. Early elementary, 6 to 8 years, they're starting to work at the basic organization and the more sustained attention type things. So there you can expect them to start completing simple tasks with guidance. So finishing a worksheet, maybe for the younger, completing some homework. They're able to start using checklists or visual reminders for organization, like planners. And it's important to remember that they still can only pay attention for about 15 to 20 minutes if you're expecting them to really take in what's happening. So if you're a teacher, a clinician, just keep that in mind as you're planning your lessons. Late elementary, again, more complex planning and problem solving. So you can expect them to start managing their school assignments more, tasks with minimal reminders, beginning to set small goals and monitoring progress, and organizing materials for school, keeping a neat binder or backpack. Adolescents, some things that they're starting to work on is advanced planning, time management, and emotional regulation. More often, you can expect them to be independently managing multiple tasks and deadlines like homework, sports. They're setting longer term goals and working towards those. And they are practicing regulating emotions in a lot of social and academic situations. And of course, we never stop, developing these things. In early adulthood, they're really working on things like more important decision-making, long-term planning, like what do I want to do? Where do I want to go to college? Do I want to get a job here? And a lot of self-monitoring. And like they said, executive functioning skills don't really stop developing till mid, and now they're saying late 20s. And if you have anything like ADHD or ASD, sometimes your brain can be maybe 2 or 3 years delayed in those skills. So just keep that in mind as we're thinking about what is, more typically developing and then what we're seeing in maybe kiddos that aren't developing these things on time. So what exactly causes all this? There's a lot of theories out there, but the main thing to remember is that it's decreased activity in the frontal lobe. That's what's impairing a lot of executive function. And there are many different factors that contribute to this decreased activity. One of which is just brain chemical imbalances or neurotransmitter imbalances, particularly dopamine. That's a chemical that's really important in all of this. It reduces focus and self-control when you don't have that. Chronic stress and high cortisol levels. So cortisol being that stress hormone that goes through your body whenever you're stressed. It can really actually shrink the prefrontal cortex if it's, going on for a long time. And that obviously impairs decision-making and emotional regulation. Lack of oxygen, if you have sleep apnea, or if you've had a stroke, or if you have asthma and had respiratory issues. If your cord was around your neck at birth, that can damage some neurons in the frontal lobe. Traumatic brain injury, that's an actual physical injury to the brain that can impact things. Substance abuse really disrupts communications between the neurons. Sleep deprivation, I really struggle with this one. It actually slows glucose metabolism, and because of that, that's what's leading to poor concentration and memory. Mental health conditions, depression, and anxiety can reduce the frontal lobe activity. Neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD, autism, if you have intellectual disabilities, those all impact what's going on with executive function. And then just aging, neurodegeneration, like Alzheimer's, dementia. It can reduce the prefrontal cortex's size, and that leads to slower processing, poorer memory, and just difficulty with planning. So these are just some of the more common things that can really impact executive functioning skills. So if you have a kiddo that comes to school and didn't get any sleep and they're in a stressful environment, their executive function skills probably are going to be a little weaker than someone who did not go through that. So now we're going to shift to learning how to identify some of these executive functioning strengths and challenges, both in our children, our clients, and ourselves. But first, let me have a little disclaimer. These suggestions are just ways to get informal look at strengths and weaknesses. They're not formal assessment tools. Like you can go to a psychologist and get like an executive functioning, test done. But this is not what this is. This is just some resources if you want to kind of look and see what might be your strengths, your weaknesses, your kids' strengths or weaknesses. So if you want something more professional, go get a licensed professional to do that. So it makes sense why we'd want to identify our children or a client or our students' EF skills or those that we're supporting. But why do we want to identify our own? Isn't the child the one with the problem? So obviously we know that's not true. It's essential that we know ourselves so that we can provide essential support for others. One of the reasons is because it helps us role model. Kids learn by watching us. So if they're watching us be organized and punctual, they're seeing that that's beneficial. If they're watching us, scramble to get out the door all the time, that's stressful, and that's what they're learning. Knowing your strengths and challenges also helps us provide effective support. You can know your strengths, so you might need to use a planner more than somebody else. And it helps us empathize too. If we know ourselves, we can say, sweetie, that's really hard for me too. And just helps people feel seen. Empathy is very important for growth. And then knowing our strengths and challenges helps us leverage our own strengths. So if we know what we're weak in, we can maybe ask our partner or another trusted adult, hey, I'm having some emotional regulation issues today. Why don't you take this one because you're much calmer? Or as a clinician or a teacher, if you're really strong in planning, you can help some families that might not be as strong, maybe help come up with a visual schedule. Or if as a clinician or a teacher, you're weaker on time management, you might know to set a timer so that you stay on track so your clients aren't, back to back, getting backed up. So those are just some ways of why it's important for us to know ourselves. And some ways to do that, there's so many ways, but these are some of my favorites. The book Smart But Scattered is the first book that they wrote, and they're actually coming up with an updated version on the 19th of this month. So if you do want this, I would wait till then to get the updated version. And then they have another version that's more geared towards teens. But in these books, they have, let me back up real quick. There's also in the Attitude Magazine website, they have a lot of just screener type tests. And one of them is called the Executive Functioning Deficit Symptom Test for Children with ADHD. And because they're an ADHD website, of course, they're focused on that term. But executive functioning skills are executive functioning skills. So doing the symptom test is going to show you regardless of whether your kid has ADHD or not. But as far as the Smart and Scattered books from earlier, they have what's called the Executive Skills Questionnaire, the ESQ. There are parent and child and teen versions. There's also an online version that you can complete, and I've linked that here. And just so you know, I have linked all of these things in a resource sheet that you will get at the end. So just know that you're getting all of this stuff. So I just put a picture here of just some examples of what they look like. There's an executive skills questionnaire for parents. There's one for preschool kids. Also in these books, other than the EF skills, they have other ways of knowing, like what's your parenting style. The teen can gauge what your parenting style is. So there's all kinds of ways that you can get to know yourself and your students or your children better so that you guys can come up with a better plan. So now the meat and potatoes of what we're here for is some strategies. The first strategy area we're going to look at is the first core skill, and that's working memory. What are some strategies that can help with that? So if you recall, working memory includes holding and using the information over short periods, like following multi-step directions, remembering what to bring to school. And again, These strategies can work for all of the different skills, but we're just going to keep them in working memory just for simplicity's sake. Things like visual checklists, schedules, memory games, repetition, visualization, and breaking tasks into small steps. We're going to look at these. So visual checklists and schedules, they provide a concrete reminder. They help us keep track of steps without having to recall each one mentally every time. So this can be as simple as a daily routine chart or checklist. And there are a lot of benefits to visual checklists and schedules because they provide clear and consistent cues, which makes expectations clear, and that makes steps easier to understand. They provide structure and predictability, which also works towards decreasing anxiety. And I think this is a very important one, supports language development. If you think about younger children, they're developing language and they might not fully understand verbal instructions. So if you can support something with a visual checklist or schedules, that's going to really help them build their comprehension and give a concrete representation for what you're asking them to do. And of course, we all want to enhance independence. So following a checklist or schedule just helps kids be more independent and builds confidence. This is a PDF picture. This is a picture of a simple, more younger kid version of a visual schedule. And you do have this in your resources. And this one here, if you look at this picture, there's a morning routine. And this one's for older kids. I made this one actually for my own personal kids. We used this one for years. And it worked pretty well. And then the other one is just an example of how you could do a morning routine and a nighttime routine. So you do have a copy of the one that I made for my family. It's also in your resources as well. Another thing that really helps with working memory is task chunking. And so that is a strategy that helps reduce cognitive load, and it just breaks larger tasks into smaller ones. So we're going to look real quick at this video because it explains it really well.
081127882 is a hard number to remember. If you chunk the number into 081127882, it's easier. Cutting large bits of information into smaller pieces helps us to understand. If we put small pieces back together, we can see the big picture, and that helps us to remember. The process is called chunking. This is how it works. Our short-term memory is fast but tiny. According to learning expert Dr. Oakley, it can hold only 4 chunks of information at once. So when new inputs arrive, it has 2 ways to pick them up. First, it can overwrite and forget what it has to make space for new information. Or it can use mental effort to move a chunk from the working memory into the long-term memory, where it can be stored and remembered later. This is why it's almost impossible to recall 9 digits like 081127882. There is simply not enough space. Once chunked, there is. There are several ways to chunk. You can break a larger piece into smaller bits, identify patterns, or group pieces to see the larger picture. Once a chunk is created, you can use deliberate practice to move it into your long-term memory where it connects with existing experiences. Now it can be stored for years and, if regularly used, accessed without much mental effort.
So that is task.
081127882 is a hard number.
There you go. Next would be memory games. So things like concentration, the game concentration. Simon is an electric game. I don't know if you remember, but it helps work with auditory and visual working memory. And then mnemonics are a fun one to remember. I don't know if they still use this anymore, but the PEMDAS to remember the order of operations for math. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I do think there were other versions of this, but this is the one we're going to use here. Also, repetition and visualization is a good thing to use for strengthening the memory. Repeating multiplication tables over and over again, especially with music. This is not a video we're going to watch, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like. The Number Rock series has some fun ways to work on repetition. Again, if you go on YouTube, you could find a plethora of different versions, genres, styles of music. Also quizzes on vocabulary and facts. And then visualization for older types of information, like teens, can hold complex information in the working memory if you use a timeline. So creating mental images. For example, when I was in high school, I had to memorize the 19 kings and queens of England. Had I realized that I could have made a visual timeline, I probably would have been less stressed about it. So those are just some simple examples of using working memory and strategies to help with those. The next little section, this is a longer section, so don't worry that all of them are going to be this long, but emotional and self-control just involves a lot of things. So there's quite a few strategies in this little section. So remember, inhibitory or self-control is just the managing your impulses. Some tools that address self-control, we're going to look at impulse control games, some visual reminders, using token systems, mindful breathing, emotional labeling, Kanban strategies, and transition strategies. Impulse control games, pretty self-explanatory. They're games that work on impulse control. So things like red light, green light, Simon Says, freeze dance. That linked here is a video that shows you a bunch of different impulse control games. And also I just linked some pictures of some common ones. And the main thing to remember about games is because it's play, you are practicing skills in real life situations. So it's probably going to stick a little bit more. Also, another one I really like is the stop and think strategy. And that is a strategy that I got off of a website. I'll tell you about it in just a second. But you use a pretend remote and you press stop to pause, fast forward to imagine possible outcomes, and then rewind to rethink choices if needed. So this method encourages kids to reflect on their actions and make thoughtful decisions. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because it came from a website called Centervention. And that is a social emotional learning site. They let you sign up free for 30 days, and you can go and download all these things for free. I found this during the COVID schooling time frame. I found this website. So again, these are not strategies that I'm promoting. Like I don't work for Centervention or anything, but these are just things that I have found to be particularly helpful and free. So some of the other options they have things on flexible thinking. They have an impulse control activity. They have growth mindset instructions. So it's just a really good resource to have in your toolbox. Also, visual reminders. If you work in a school or you've ever been in a school, a lot of times they have stop signs like at the door or on the floor to show you where to line up. At home, sometimes I'll use this. If I'm leaving and the pizza's still in the oven, I put a note so the kids don't forget to turn off the stove. And then I also had a kiddo once that had a skin picking problem, and they would go disappear into the bathroom and just pick their skin. It'd almost be like a trance. And so I put this up in the bathroom just to help cue them to move things along, because they weren't really doing it on purpose. They would just kind of get caught up in it. And sometimes if they saw that sign, they would be like, oh yeah, I got to get up. So that's a way you could use those things. And then token and point systems. I'm sure we're all somewhat familiar with these. They're simple ones like this one. You get 3 stars, you can go to the playground. There's more complex one for maybe older kids, digital options. Class dojo is a very common one in the schools. Kids will get dojo points for doing things, catching them being good kind of things. There's iReward app, there's Manatee app. So I'm sure there's other ones out there, but those are some of the ones that I found that were pretty easy to use. And then you've got mindful breathing strategies here. The top little section is more for younger kids, like breathing buddies, star breathing, a lot more visuals involved. And then the ones under that are more for teens and older kids. There's grounding techniques, like look around the room and find 5 blue items. That's a way you can calm your brain down and get your thinking brain back online. Progressive muscle relaxation. And then there's some guided visualization apps that are listed here, like Headspace and the Calm app. So those are, again, more resources for your toolbox. Also, teaching emotional labeling is very important. It's important for us to model, label, and normalize emotions. So talk about your own feelings. Show that it's okay to express emotions. You could say, I'm happy because we had such a fun day at the zoo. Or you could reflect your child's emotions, like, I see you're upset because your toy broke. Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling frustrated? So you're giving them words to put into these feelings they're having. Also, books, stories, songs, those are very easy ways to talk about emotions. Obviously, the movie Inside Out is a great tool to use. Visual tools like emotion charts and apps. Older kids could maybe use an emotion wheel because they have a lot more nuanced. Younger kids might use mad, sad. Older kids might use frustrated or irritated. So there's all kinds of tools like that. emotional labeling games like charades or matching games just to name feelings, art and creative expression. You could use clay to make emotions. You could make the characters from inside out. And then just discussing emotions when you're watching TV or movies. You could pause it, say, hey, how do you think that character feels? Or relate it to real life experiences. Just a real good way to build some empathy and social and emotional awareness just in everyday activities. And here is just a few of the emotional labeling resources. There are more on your sheet that I'll give you at the end. But this is the Color Monster picture. It's a book, and it comes with, you can buy these little color monsters to go with it. Also social stories. There's one linked here called Sensations, How My Body Talks to Me. And then on the other side, the Emotionary app. It's really neat because it's basically a dictionary for emotions, but also you can draw your own emotions on there if you have an iPad or a phone, and kids can make up their own funny emotions. So that's a fun way to work on that skill as well. Also, making sure you have a space for them to go if they are, getting dysregulated. You can have a tent, a cardboard box. There's a reading nook. So anything where they can just kind of go away. You could have sensory toys in there, weighted blankets. There's just a variety of creative ways you could do that. When you are creating a space for them to calm down, you just want to make sure you are making sure the lighting isn't too much, that you could have blackout curtains for light reduction. Sound, you want to make sure it's not echoey. White noise machines or sound dampening material. Sometimes carpets are just good for that. Or even just having access to headphones. Making sure there's a variety of tactile elements, cushions, bumpy balls, fidget toys. Some calming input like beanbag chairs or resistance bands can help bring calming to the body. Movement options, so if there's rocking chairs or if there's opportunity for swing, spinning seats, wobble cushions, anything like that. And then just making sure all this is organized where it's not just a mess in wherever space you're in. Making sure people aren't wearing a lot of perfumes, make sure the scents are more natural or none at all. And then just making sure if it's too cold or too hot, you have ways to fix that. So fans or warm blankets to make people feel more comfortable. And these are just, again, some more links of strategies that might help with a calm down space, like headphones. I've linked to bouncy bands here. It's the foot band. Desker size is just exercises you can do at your desk. There's a link to standing desks, fidget cubes, stress balls. These are just examples to get you thinking. Another great one is transition strategies. Transitions are so hard for most of us, especially when you're little. One of them are transition warnings. So 5 minutes left to play. And if they don't understand time, you could say 2 more turns and then we're done. This really can help reduce anxiety. Using transition objects is good, letting them take a teddy bear or just a toy that every time you go to the lunchroom, you take a spoon, something that helps them know where they're going and if it provides any comfort to them. Transition songs are very popular, especially in the school setting. Everybody Have a Seat songs is one that we probably all know. And because it's a song, it builds, it captures their attention, and that can build consistency. Transition walks, again, if it's appropriate, you don't want to be crab walking in the bathroom for sanitary reasons, but it can be a fun and playful bridge from one activity to the next because it gives their bodies like a physical break, especially if you're moving from a high activity to a high energy activity to a lower activity. Energy activity, that can be a nice way to help bring their body back down to a place where they can sit and learn. So deep pressure and just body input, it just has a calming effect on the body. So the next is the mental flexibility strategies. Those are the ones that are going to let us adapt to new situations. So things like offering choices, reframing challenges, introducing small gradual changes, and playing flexible thinking games. So do you want to play with blocks or color? Or when you're reframing challenges, you could say, how else could we solve this problem? What's another way to approach this situation? When you introduce small gradual changes, you can just slightly adjust dinner time or bedtime, or just maybe change one thing in their schedule if they can tolerate it. If they can't, you want to back up. And playing flexible thinking games. Some of these are like Pictionary, Taboo, 20 questions. Then we've got planning. Strategies for planning, using play to practice planning, using task planners and calendars, teaching backward planning, and creating visual timelines. So using play helps work on planning skills in a lower pressure and engaging environment. You can ask questions like, what supplies do you need? What could you try next? That encourages flexibility in planning and adjusting as you go. And can you imagine what it's going to look like at the end? That can really help visualize and plan for a final goal. And also task planners and calendars. That's, we all ideally use those to manage our days. For kids, you might use a more visual planner with more pictures. Older kids, teens, you can use more digital, physical planners. I'm going to let you in on a little secret about the best planner on the market. The best planner I've ever seen is the one that gets used. That is the best planner on the market. So it doesn't really matter which one it is. If it's working, go with it. But there are, suggestions. So I do have a link here for some best school planner tips. And backward planning. That sounds fancy, but it really just means look at where the goal is and back up and make smaller deadlines. So if you have a project due in 2 weeks, you set a mini deadline. Researching needs to be done by this time. Drafting needs to be done by this time. Editing needs to be done by this time. So working backwards is a way you can help prioritize steps. And then creating visual timelines. It gives an at-a-glance view of tasks and timeframes. So the one on the right here is a Gantt chart, and that just displays things visually, and they show dependencies. So a Gantt chart can show that you can't start another task until this one's finished, or it can show that you can do these 2 tasks at the same time. Other things that I like to use, I like the app Trello. It has similar features. Monday.com has a lot of these project planning things, and these are more, for adults, but they are the same idea as far as using those types of visuals for planning. Task initiation would be the next one. Using task starting songs, the 5-minute rule, and visual timers and reminders. Here I've just linked some songs. Again, not going to play them for you, but the wake up song, put your shoes on song, things like that can help kids get from one place to the next or get started. And then the 5-minute rule. You start a task, so you say, study for 5 minutes, and then you can take a break. But starting is usually the hardest part. Homework or toys. How many toys can you pick up in 5 minutes? Because usually once people get started, they keep going. This one is for me. I'll jog for 5 minutes and then I'll rest. Getting started is usually the hardest problem. This is another resource for you. It is just a handout to explain the 5-minute rule if you ever needed it for, teaching purposes. Visual timers and reminders. I really like the visual timer on top. It's a very common one you'll see. Just shows you in the red. The red disappears, the time is disappearing. I also really like the one called the visual countdown timer for little kids, because as it goes away, there's a picture and they really like to see what picture it's going to be. It's different every time. You can just use regular timers, phone alarms. The Forest app is really neat. It's kind of a gamified productivity app. So you plant a virtual tree, and the more you stay off of your phone, the more, and stay focused, the more the tree grows. So if you touch your phone, the tree starts to wilt. So it's kind of just a fun way to stay focused. My husband actually uses this one. And then we use these all over our house, the smart speakers. We have one in every room. And so like if my child goes down and puts their laundry in, they'll say, Alexa, set a timer for 90 minutes for laundry. And then in 90 minutes, they'll go off in the whole house. And so everybody knows that your laundry is ready. Still working on getting them to actually go take it out and move it, but they are aware of it. And then organization. These are pretty, self-explanatory, but I am a fairly organized person. So maybe I'm just assuming they're self-explanatory, but maybe they might be harder for some people. So teaching sorting and categorizing is important, using visual labels, creating a launchpad area, and teaching one at a time or a place for everything. So when you're teaching sorting and categorizing, by book size, color, using visual labels, color coding can be very, very helpful. There's a show called The Home Edit that is very, very, they do everything by color, and it's very pretty. might be a little not as easily reproduced by other people, but it's really neat if you want to watch that show. And it just makes cleaning up and finding items easier. Creating a launch pad area. So when you come in, all your shoes, your backpack, your keys, they all go in a central area. That way in the morning, you know everything's there. You don't have to go looking for it and potentially be late. And one at a time rule. It's just encouraging kids to play with one toy at a time and put it away before you get another one out. It's really hard to do. If you don't, if you can't do it, it's okay. But that is a goal that you can try to work on, especially in like a school setting. Before we take out the puzzle, let's put the blocks back in. And then a place for everything. Organizing things into categories, putting labels, making sure, the trucks go over here, the books go over here. And then the last strategy we are going to look at is time management strategies. So the Pomodoro technique, time blocking, estimating time for tasks, predictable daily routines, and just learning to see your time. So the Pomodoro technique is just a time management technique that breaks things into short, manageable intervals. It's an Italian word that means tomato because they usually use a tomato-shaped timer. You work in focused 25-minute sessions called Pomodoros, and then you take a 5-minute break. You do 4 cycles of this, then you take a longer break, like 15 to 30 minutes to recharge. There is an app that actually has these, 25, 5, 15, 30. I think it's called the Pomodoro app. And there's also a video that I've linked to explain it more in depth and give you some ideas on how you could use it. And then time blocking, that's pretty, you say from 4 to 5, I'm going to do my homework. 5 to 6 is exercise. 6 to 6:30 is dinner. 6:30 to 7 is shower. And you can use a calendar or written planner for these types of things. Estimating time for tasks is a really important skill to teach because we often overestimate how much time we have. I really like also using these checklists for having predictable routines so they can know how much more they have to do before we have to leave the house. I really like the chore chart that comes from Amazon because it has little clickers where you can mark off that you've done them. And so that's also linked here. And then free time tracking apps are also linked here as well. And then learning to see time is very important for building these skills. Abstract ideas become concrete. So a time management worksheet where you just look at your day and fill in like 8 hours sleeping. And then you take all that information and you can kind of see what a realistic view of your time how it's being spent. And that is also in your resources. And then the clock strategy is the last strategy we're going to look at. And that's learning how to visualize some time. So for example, you would need an analog clock for this, but I'll show you this. Hang on, I'll show you the last one. The last one, I really like this picture because they used an analog clock and they used a dry erase marker. And so this one is for the morning routine. So you can see it's bathroom, get dressed, breakfast, pack up. They leave a little wiggle room and then the bus comes. They also, in this video that I linked, show you how to do it with homework, how to break down a writing task. So it's a really neat way to kind of help kids learn how long things are taking. So that, I feel like we just got here and it's almost time to go. That's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today, some of those practical strategies. And I'm just putting this here so that you'll have a little wrap up of what we talked about. We talked about the definition of executive functioning. We talked about common challenges and some practical strategies. And then just as we move forward, some things to keep in mind. First, start small. You only want to have one strategy at a time so you don't get overwhelmed and those you're supporting don't get overwhelmed. Don't forget to model the strategies, ones you use yourself, and so others can see how they're benefiting you. Celebrate progress, not perfection. Celebrate those small wins. If your child or student writes down their assignment 1 day out of 5 days and they've never done that before, that is a celebration. Maybe next week they'll do it 2 days and then so on and so on. So those are ways to celebrate progress. And of course, stay flexible. We have to be open to adjusting and changing because nothing ever works forever. And what works for one person obviously is not going to work for someone else. So real quick, I want you to list one thing in the chat that you might try with somebody or with yourself that kind of kicked it off.
And Lindsay, I did want to catch you. I'm so sorry. We have a question in the chat and
Oh, okay.
it said, what is a launch pad area? If you'd like to clarify that.
So like in our home, you walk into the house and this is where everybody puts their coats. We have a spot for shoes. We have a spot for keys. And so they don't go throwing it around the house. It always goes there when we come in. And so when we leave again, everything's there. So that's what I mean when I say launch pad. I hope that, does that clarify things? I hope.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oh, I'm sorry I set off your Alexa, whoever said that. Oh, the Gantt chart. Ooh. Yes, I like the analog clock. I need to use that one. And yes, I know it's such a short time to go through all these, so I apologize if I had to speed up. I was realizing we only had like 5 minutes left. So that's why I did create such a big resource list for you guys, because this is more like a toolbox. And that's what I really wanted you guys to take away, stuff you could actually use. Let me show you how to get to it.
And
if
Lindsay,
you have more questions, yeah, go ahead.
I did want to check with you because we will send this presentation out to folks in a follow-up email. Are the links that you have linked throughout, are those clickable links they'll be able to access?
They are, and this next slide has a resource sheet, like actual website link and a QR code. And if for some reason you can't find it that way, you can just email me and I can send you an email as well. So you will get this in some form if you can't access it in these ways.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And if you don't mind, I do have a electronic evaluation that we have to do for meeting grant requirements and things like that. So if you have a second, please fill this out. We do a quarterly drawing for anyone that does fill them out. So that is a small incentive. And I know that Kentucky Spin has their own evaluation that they're going to send out too. So I really appreciate them letting me take the evaluation time today, because I know it's hard to just, you fill out this evaluation, you fill out this evaluation. So I really appreciate that, guys, for letting me do that. So I hope that was helpful. It was really fun to be here with you guys. So
But we want to say thank you so much for coming today. This was invaluable and a huge topic that so many want to learn from or about. So once again, thank you so much. And the QR code here and the link to the evaluation for Lindsay will also come out in the PowerPoint that we will send out within 24 hours following this webinar. And as well as any other resources that were provided today. And we want to thank everyone for coming and spending an hour with us to lunch and learn about executive functioning. We hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Again, Lindsay, thanks so much for being with us.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you.